what I want to talk about first is how the internet works. The internet is really a series of computers. We all kind of know this in a certain sense, but when you go to a website, let's say you want to go to the one that we're on right now is passionclass.co. So when you go to passionclass.co, you're on a machine, so that could be your phone, that could be your individual laptop or your individual desktop, and that's called the client, okay? And the reason it's called the client is it's a lot like in the restaurant when you have clients and you have servers. And what servers do is they serve, just like at a restaurant, a server serves your computer, or the computer serves the client, which is your computer, your iPhone, your laptop, whatever, your iPad. It serves the client information, and that's kind of what that's kind of where these terms come from. The client is the one who orders and says, I want this information, and the server is the one that provides that information. So that seems kind of clear, but that is actually what the delineation between front end and back end is. So the front end is the code that runs on the client. The front end is the code that runs on your machine. It runs on your iPhone. It runs on your computer. It runs on your iPad. That's what the front end is, and the back end is the code that essentially runs on the server. And the server here in this example, we have a single server. This example, we have a single server. That's very simple. That's mostly not the case today. Like, so for example, if you're going to a huge website like Instagram, it is pretty clear that one computer on the back end is not going to be sufficient to serve all the clients all the information that they're asking for. And so how the internet actually works is your client, your individual machine, will send a request to a particular server. What this is you'll say, I want to go to a website. So let's say you type in passionclass.co. Then it will take you to there's a service that translates this kind of human readable web address into an IP address, which is a series of numbers. And then your computer is actually connected directly to that IP address. That's not so important. I just kind of throw that in there so you know that's actually what it's doing. That there is a service that says when you go to Passion Class or any website, Instagram, it doesn't really matter, Udemy, it takes you to a service that converts the letters and numbers that you plugged in as the web address to a specific IP address. And that basically puts your computer in contact with another computer. And that computer is a server. That's the back end. That's what's in the cloud. And what that means is at a very small website may have a single server. That is possible. A larger website is actually going to have a machine that says, hey, I'm the server for Instagram, for example. Every time you send a request to Instagram, your machine is going to connect with one computer that's going to be actually routing it to a different computer, so that each computer, like this one I know is working with 50 people, this one's working with 50 people, this one's working with 50 people, this one's only working with 13. I'll direct traffic to this computer. And that's kind of what the first server does. And then on the back end, what the server does, there's a couple of things. I'm actually going to add this here as we talk right now. So one thing that it does is when you are working, the most important thing that the back end does is have databases. So when you type a comment on Instagram, what's actually happening is that your client, your front end, connects with the server. It'll send a message to the server. The server will write that into a database. And then the database will save that information permanently. And so the other advantage of that system is if there are other servers interacting with other clients, like in the example we just talked about for Facebook, for example, or Instagram, where there's multiple clients, because there's literally millions of people on Instagram at the same time, and so they need multiple servers. So I post a comment on your profile, and that is immediately available. That's immediately written into the database via the server. So the client, the front end, sends a request to the back end to the server. The server processes that request by saving it into a database, and then when somebody else who's interfacing with a different server um, looks at my profile or looks at your profile, I think I wrote the comment on your profile, and there's a different front end over here, um, then no problem, because that server is going to query the database and say, oh, okay, hey, this information is written right here. Does that make sense? You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So
It's a lot, but yeah.
so that's yeah. So that's like the basic. That's the easiest way I can explain it. So the most important thing that we're going to look at today, you don't have to know exactly how that all works, but the thing that I want you to have an understanding of is what the difference is between the front end and the back end. And the back end is the part we're going to look at today. The front end is the code that runs on your machine. Let me just kind of run through this again. It is definitely much harder if you don't have the visual. But the front end is the client. It is the code that runs on the user's machine. So that's the user's iPhone, that's the user's cell phone, that's the user's laptop, something like that. The back end is the code that runs on the server. So that's code like when you write a comment on my post a comment on my Instagram, your computer sends a request to the server and says, I want to save this comment to a database, or I want to save this comment to Joe's, your front end actually says, your client actually says, I want to save this comment on Joe's wall, or whatever it's called on Instagram. I'm not an Instagram guy, as you may be able to tell. And then the server has code that receives that request from your client and says, okay, Bana wants to save a comment to Joe's wall. Let me write that into the database. So that's code that runs on the back end, and that's because we don't have direct access to Facebook's databases. We only have access to essentially what they send us, what they serve us, and so that's the difference between front end and back end. So the back end is the code that runs on the server. It's the code that doesn't run on your individual machine. And by the way, when you go to most websites today, most of the code that runs on a website is actually running on your machine. It's not actually running on the back end. It's running on your front end. So for example, in this website that we're in right now, in this video conferencing space, pretty much all of this code is running on your individual machine. The only thing that the back end is doing is linking the video streams between your machine and my machine. And that's all like a backend will be doing. But other than that, most of the code's actually running on your individual machine and my individual machine, for example. And if I go on a different website and if you go on a website and you test in the search function, for example, that you'll have to connect with a server to pull information. But after that, like a search function is usually going to run primarily on the front end already, because what you're doing is limiting information it already has. That's just an example. But that's the difference between front end and back end. Let me pause here and say, are there any questions?
No. So just to understand, so it's the client is basically making a request, and then it sends the server sends it back and makes it happen, and then sends it back to the front.
Very, very, very good question. So let me that is 90% correct. That is 90% correct. So specifically, a front end, a client will send a request to the server, exactly like you said. The server will process that request, and if it needs to save data or do whatever, then that would be very typical, like to save data to a database, or alternatively to retrieve data from a database and send it to the front end. That's very typical. And then what we would say is the server then sends a response to the client's request. So all requests are expecting responses. So when your server sends a request, or excuse me, when it can also be a server that sends a request, but whenever a computer sends a request, it does expect a response. And so that's kind of how, and once it gets a response, that process is completed. One request, one response.
Question. So, for example, like when someone puts in a password, or for example, and then they do it wrong, so they send, so the front end is sending it back, but then if they don't meet, I guess, the criteria, it's to say, oh, it's wrong, and so that would be kind of like another request from the server back to the front end.
So that would be the response. So that's a very good. So that's exactly, you're thinking about it the exact right way. So the front end will send a request to the server, and the server will process that request. So if the user's password is wrong, so basically the front end will send a username and password combination into a request to the server. The server will process that request. It will check in its database and say, is this username and password combination correct? If it is, then the user will get probably a 200 response, which means everything is correct. Otherwise, they will probably get a 403, which means unauthorized. That's not important, but basically the request is let me access, and the server will process that authentication, and then the response will be okay or no.
Yeah.
And that's from the server. So it's that single request response, and every single request expects a response. And that's kind of how that circle gets closed.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. No, very good. That's a great question. Thank you very much for asking it. Okay, so you could just go to codeinterview.io, and then there should be a thing that says like try demo now, and it looks like this.
Yes.
Okay, change it from Python 3 to Web Express. That's what I want. Not JavaScript Node, Web Express. So change it from Python 3 to Web Express. Actually, you want to take a stab at explaining to me what's happening here?
So I've seen some of this stuff before, but I've kind of forgotten.
No worries. That's what we're here for.
There is a variable called Express, and it's, I guess, requiring. Oh no, maybe that's wrong. I was going to say requiring information from another page.
So basically the first two lines are that require is the equivalent of like an import statement. What this basically means, these first two lines mean that Express is third-party code. It's a package that we just import. It's free on the internet, and so we don't have to write any of the code to spin up a server. And that's all we're doing, is we're importing these two packages. So that's that's happening on lines 1 and 2. So we're actually using Express. And what Express is, to make that clear, because that's not obvious, is it's a very quick way, it's called Express, to spin up a server on your machine. So it's your machine can quickly spin up a server, which basically means it's the ability that you can go to a port on your machine. You can go to the equivalent of a website, and you can see that website. You see where it says HTTP 5AB1 on the right-hand side.
Oh yeah.
That is where that server has spun up a link to it. And actually, if you were to go to that link in a different tab of your browser, that will actually be a website now. That will actually be a website that returns the response. So what we've done, what Express does, is it gives you the ability to spin up a server, and that's what is happening on lines 1 and 2. We're literally just importing packages for that, but we haven't actually built any servers yet.
Oh right. So maybe I'm wrong, but so if anyone was to write that first line on their end, would that then create a server?
So
whatever stuff they're trying to build.
Almost. So what it would do is it would make the code available so that someone could spin up a server. So let's actually take a look at lines 4. Let's actually just look at all these. So let me kind of explain line by line. Line 4, that's just standard syntax. That basically means after we've imported Express, now we have the ability to actually call it in this application. Don't worry about it. It's just standard syntax. It's just the requirements of the package. And then lines 11 through 13, we define a function where we say if someone goes to web address backslash on our base domain. Then, so basically that means our base domain. The backslash, if you go to, for example, where we are right now, you can add a backslash essentially to the end of any website unless it already has a backslash, and it takes you to the exact same location that you're at now. So if you go to Instagram.com backslash or Instagram.com, you get the same page. And so this backslash means the base domain on line 11. And what it does is it sends a response. You can see here we have what we call in JavaScript an anonymous function. That just basically means we have a function written in line. If you're not a JavaScript expert, don't super worry about it. It's not a big deal. This is called an anonymous function. This request and response are our arguments, and then what happens inside the squiggles here on lines 11 through 13 are what the function actually does. And basically what it does is what we see on line 12, which just says every time you go there, it will send a response of hello Express. And again, when we actually went to that, did you open that website in a different tab?
Yeah, it shows exactly the same.
It shows exactly the same. Exactly right. So it shows that hello Express. So that's what our response is. Our response says hello Express, and that's what you should see. That's what you should see when you go to this website over here. So you get that hello Express. Now add something to that hello Express. Make it. I'll change it. It says hello Banna. Does it say hello Banna on your end too?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now let's go to this website again and see what it looks like.
Oh yeah.
So what we have done here is spun up a server that every time you enter this, every time you send a GET request to this base domain, that's what this GET means. There's four major types of requests. The two most important are GET and POST. GET means I want to get information from the server. POST means I want to send information to the server. And when you send a GET request, that means I want to access this information. And so when you say, so that's what we've just created here. This server just automatically responds with hello Banna.
Yeah.
Cool. Does that make sense so far? Any questions?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, sounds great. Then line 15. What line 15 does, it's not intuitive from the syntax, so I'll just explain it, is on line 11 through 13, we are actually, like I said, just spinning up that first GET request. Then on line 15, we're actually telling our server to listen. So that means this 80 indicates the port. That's not super important. If you're doing it on local development, then that would mean that you'd have to go to localhost :80, and that would tell you, that means I'm running it on port 80. ChatGPT could do a great job of explaining what exactly that means if you were to get stuck there. But it literally just means the port, each machine has something like, if I'm remembering correctly, 46,000 ports that various things can connect to. Just like a USB port, you can plug in external stuff into your machine. These kind of ports work in the same way, where port 80 is just a port on your machine that we plugged our server into. And so if you go to then, we're not running this on a local machine. We're actually running this on codeinterview.io. But if you're running it on your local machine, it would be on the port 80. So that's all. But what that means is we're telling our server on line 15, listen, aka spin up the server. So on line 11 through 13, we've defined what we want the server to do, and then on line 15, we're actually spinning it up. We said, okay, now we've defined what we want the server to do. Now actually run the server. And that's what line 15 does. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So do you see the updated code?
Yeah.
Okay. What happens on line 10 through 12? Can you explain that to me real quick?
So we are... so we're going to request and retract. Sorry. So we're getting this information and responding and sending it to the front end,
I-
this line.
Exactly. So that is pretty good. Let me precisify that a little bit if I can. So
Yeah.
so this is the same syntax we saw before. We remember the two most important request types are get and post. And
Yeah.
so this get, what this get function does on line 10 is it says when the /root is called with a get request, when a user sends a get request to the /root, then do what happens on line 11, which is respond with this welcome to your first Express app. So just like it said hello Bana before, now it would say hello, welcome to your first Express app. So that's what we've done there.
Okay, yeah. So when they actually click on and go onto that web page, this is what they will see.
Exactly.
Is that what?
Exactly.
The first thing they would see. Yeah. Just a question.
Mm-hmm.
So after where it says get, and then you got the request and response in the brackets, is that just to to say this is what is happening?
Exactly. So specifically,
Okay.
so to make sure I'm understanding, where it says on line 10, for example,
Yes.
after the comma, so there's a backslash and
Yeah.
then there's a comma. You're talking
Yeah.
about what starts with request response and then continues until the squiggly bracket on line 12. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So what that is, that's called in JavaScript. It's called an anonymous function. We don't have to write it as an anonymous function. You could write it as a real function. So let me actually do that for a second. I'm using older syntax, but I do think it's easier for some people to process because it's kind of what you would expect from most high-level programming languages. So I move this over here. We're going to call this get request, or let me call it handle get request because that's really what this function does. Handle, actually, it's really handle homepage. And what this does, I don't know if this is clear for you or not, but then what I've done is replace that function on line 13 with this handle homepage function. So what we've done here is we have a function that when the user sends a GET request to the homepage on line 14, the homepage being defined by the backslash, then this handle homepage function will get called.
Right.
And what handle homepage does is it has two arguments. It has a request argument and a response argument. So for example, if the user had sent any data in the request, I'm trying to think of a thing. So for example, if they had sent like URL, some headers would be in there, any headers that their GET request had. So for example, an authentication header might be in there to see whether you were already logged in, something like that. That's a little more advanced than we want to get into today, but that's a definite possibility for what's in some information contained in the header argument. And the response is basically what you're going to be sending in Express. And you can build that over time. You can add headers. You can do whatever you want to do with it. But this send keyword, the send function, is built onto response objects in Express by default. And what we have done here is specify the exact string. And in this case, we're just responding with a string of what the text is that we want to respond with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Great. Very good. Very good. You're doing great, Bana. So let's look at line. Let's look at line 16 now. What is the difference? Look at the green text. What is the difference here? What is the difference in the green text compared to line 13? What is the difference here in the green text on line 16 and 13? So what is this saying on line 16?
I think so. So at first, where we got the slash, is the home page, and then I'm thinking it's saying to go to the greet page.
Exactly.
Then,
exactly.
The name.
So that is not intuitive. So that you're exactly right. You're thinking about it in the exact right way, and you're 100% correct even. So the name, we actually are able to make this something from the URL itself into a parameter. So you can see here on line 17, we've defined a variable that is request.params.name. And name obviously is the same as the green name that begins with a colon on line 16. And so now name is available in our text. And so our response on line 18 is hello name. If you were to go to the server now, and then it will respond with greet. And if we go to server /greet /Bana, then it will say hello Bana. So yeah, man.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Just a question.
Yep.
For line 17, where it's the variable and it's request.parameter.name. Why do you know why it says parameter in the middle?
Yes, I do. Because we have added parameters. Parameters means part of the URL. That is what's being called, that's the name of it here. So you could have also headers on your request. That's what param means. It means the things that are directly in the URL.
Okay.